I love queer cinema and hate romance, which sounds like an oxymoron if your idea of queer cinema stops at coming out films. My ideal film is that there's a batshit plot going and the people are gay. Like, oh yeah, any number of queer-coded horror and camp movies. Have you ever wondered why gay people like Rocky Horror Picture Show so much? Well, it's that, plus shouting obscenities at Tim Curry wearing a corset. But to be more exact, there's a sort of affinity between otherness, queer people, and horror movie tropes. From the OG Nosferatu to instant hits like the Fear Street trilogy, the queer community really likes horror. So, I wanted to look at horror and queerness in two of my favorite films of all time, and ended up here. Well, I ended up looking into surrealism instead, which is sort of horror adjacent, but no worries. Surrealism, to put in simplest terms, is just that stuff when you see it and you're like, what the hell am I looking at? Which I think is very silly, very queer, and very endearing. It is technically a lot more than that, but for brevity, that's what we're running with for now. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once and I Saw the TV Glow. Two kick-ass movies about queer people, the multiverse, and they will make you cry. Obviously, there will be spoilers. This is how Everything Everywhere All at Once and I Saw the TV Glow use surrealism and queer storytelling to show how belonging to a marginalized identity is like existing between realities. We have a tendency to call almost anything that weirds us out surreal. Surrealist cinema, as it turns out, is a very specific movement that occurred in the early 20th century, which was pretty localized to France between the 20s and 30s. But that can't be right. Surrealism's all over the place. Yeah, even though the official Surrealist movement was pretty short-lived, its legacy lives on. Films like David Lynch's Eraserhead would be brought under the Surrealist umbrella later, but it's viewed more as a successor to the movement, which spawned its own niche of Lynchian films. Basically, elements of Surrealist cinema live on in the framework of contemporary cinema. Surrealism is characterized by shocking, absurd, and irrational imagery, dreamlike sequences, structure and logic, Freudian concepts of the subconscious, and blurring perceptions of reality. Surrealism is that genre that's like, I'm not like other girls, which arguably makes it not a genre at all because there's no way to really break it down to a standardized aesthetic or formula. This is partly why it's all over the place. It meshes well with other genres, but isn't principally a genre on its own. Though it does lend well to horror because its use of shocking and bizarre imagery, not all surrealist films are horror, and vice versa. At the core of surrealist filmmaking is the power to present the shocking, absurd, and irrational and unsettled one sense of reality. These surrealist elements of filmmaking are so embedded within the modern toolbox of film artistry that they've put immense distance from their original origins, but have been codified into recognizable conventions. Although surrealist filmmaking elements invoke a sense of high art associated with the original surrealist project, they could be understood within a broader modern context of their own. Queer cinema should be a lot easier to define, right? Not at all. There's a stupid amount of ways you can analyze a film for queerness. Does the movie have queer characters? Queer-coded characters? Is it made by queer people? Do people like and read it as queer? Does it oppose dominant modes of Hollywood filmmaking like documentary or independent film? The bottom line across all of these questions is whether or not the film engages with queerness meaningfully. Oftentimes, poor representation of queer characters just reifies heteropatriarchal power structures. Queerness, as I understand it, is more than just a label. It is an active agent. It's a way of challenging heteropatriarchal norms. If a work fails to do this, then personally, I wouldn't consider it effective queer cinema at all. However, regardless of what I think, what ultimately transforms a film into a queer film, though, is its resonance with a collective audience. With queer representation on screen becoming more and more explicit these days, it's easy to say that we've come a long way since the days of the Hays Code. But is the representation good? One could argue that queer cinema has matured in its ambitions of storytelling. While one-dimensional stereotypes of queerness have largely fallen out of fashion, what replaced them allowed for a rich corpus of coming-out stories. This is your typical, "Oh no, I think I'm gay. How will I ever be accepted or loved by the people around me?" narrative. It's been done. These stories have merits, but this doesn't change the fact that we're saturated by them. And frankly, I want something more. Queerness doesn't follow one trajectory, so why should queer stories? Viewing the queer narrative as something clear-cut is antithetical to the spirit of queer cinema. Queerness is a mess of contradictions that push against heteropatriarchal norms. We've come a long way, but there's still more work to be done in terms of mainstream queer narratives, especially when it comes to representing marginalized identities on screen, which is why we're talking about You might be asking yourself what happens in these films, and why are they so special and dear to my heart? Well, starting with Everything Everywhere All at Once. At first glance, it appears to be a standard multiverse action romper. No, not like that. Michelle Yeoh stars as laundromat owner Evelyn Wong, who's charged by an alternate universe version of her husband to save the multiverse from an omniversal version of her daughter, Joy, or Jobu Tupaki. At its core, this film examines questions of existentialism, familial relationships, generational trauma, and queer acceptance. After Evelyn becomes omniversal herself, she connects with Joy and convinces her that life is still worth living. Still, it's absurd as hell and feels like several consecutive emotional gut punches. But no worries, I Saw the TV Glow is arguably more distressing. If I had to describe this movie in as few words as possible, it's a psychological horror that sits with you. The film follows two queer 90s teens, Owen and Maddie, and their shared interest in the TV series The Pink Opaque. Years after high school, Maddie walks back into Owen's life and reveals that she buried herself alive and escaped into the real world, the Pink Opaque, and their current reality is a fabrication called the Midnight Realm. Owen doesn't take it very well. Ultimately, Owen clings to their perceived reality and they finally dare to look inside and find what they feared all along. This Ed Crack moment is drawn out in a reality-defying narrative with crushing implications, all wrapped around the core theme: there is still time. I Saw the TV Glow asks, what happens if you never act on your true identity? What if you resolve to yourself to slowly withering away? At what point do you gain the courage to transition, to come out, to live authentically? And then it ends there and leaves you to sit with that for the rest of your life.
It just ended. Forever.
Surrealism complements narratives that defy reality, which is the foundation of both Everything Everywhere and I Saw the TV Glow. While Everything Everywhere delves into the absurd possibilities of the multiverse and Evelyn and Jobu's capacity to live multiple lives simultaneously, I Saw the TV Glow presents the idea that its protagonists aren't in the correct reality or bodies. That's a trans allegory if I heard one. Both of these films are steeped in surrealist cinematic elements. Everything Everywhere blends subgenres with different visual cues that the characters can access, with allusions to every imaginable trans-Pacific film genre: dystopian science fiction, wuxia, kung fu, superhero, anime, romantic comedy, immigrant family drama, art house, nostalgic romance. The multiverse becomes a powerful rhetorical device. Even though Evelyn and Jobu move through it at a rapid pace, the viewer is disoriented but never confused which genre is being invoked. The contradicting genres lead to Evelyn's adaptability but also reinforce the core narrative as the differing genres form one cohesive story. Stylistically, it employs absurdist and surreal imagery, from Jobu attempting to commit suicide with a black hole in the shape of a bagel.
All my hopes and dreams, my old report cards, every breed of dog, every last personal ad on Craigslist, sesame, poppy seed, salt.
To using a butt plug shaped trophy to gain martial arts skills. The film bends both reality and the audience's expectations with absurd imagery. Another staple of surrealist filmmaking is non-linear storytelling to disrupt the audience's expectations, which Everything Everywhere All at Once does with concurrent plotlines occurring across the multiverse. It also explores the personal philosophies of its characters, from Jobu's pessimistic nihilism to Wayman's and then later Evelyn's more optimistic absurdism. You can even look at this adoption of surrealism as a commentary on the Asian and Asian American diasporas. Rejecting a singular genre immersion is like rejecting assimilation. It's seeking connection, it's existing between realities, it's every movie, every genre, all at once. Meanwhile, I Saw the TV Glow is strengthened by the juxtaposition between the two universes, the Midnight Realm and the Pink Opaque. Both are visually discrete. One appears as a poor TV production with a lo-fi charm, while the other world is fever dream-like nostalgic eye candy, which reveals itself as more and more hollow as the film progresses. Differences in aspect ratio and use of monochromatic tones of blues, purples, and pinks are thrown into strobing chaos as Owen grapples with their reality. This accomplishes psychological depth in a surrealist film, effectively weaving juxtapositions between what characters know is real and what they feel or fear. The film is charged with dysphoric, queer, and neurodivergent allegories, from Owen's insistence that where their identity should be, they just feel hollow, to learning that they are literally Isabel living in the wrong body, The story is plainly and irrefutably a metaphor for the transgender or genderqueer experience. Owen captures the surrealist lack of motivation, continually rejecting the call to action until the last moment. In any other film, Owen's ending would be the climax or the end of the second act, driving a knife into their chest in accepting that they are Isabel. We could imagine a third act where Owen gains the courage to follow Tara into the pink opaque, but that is not the point of Owen. Owen is passive, timid, and ambiguous, and that is what makes I Saw the TV Glow a surrealist film as much as it is an existential horror. What makes these movies the absolute maturation of queer cinema? First, using reality bending as a framing device likens queerness and belonging to a marginalized identity to existing between realities. Plus, use of literary devices such as allegory and metaphor and the framing of queerness as choice above all elevate the films. A central theme of Everything Everywhere All at Once is one's life choices, meaning if every universe is born of a person's difference in choices, who's to say that any person isn't queer or straight in another world? For Evelyn, this is the hot dog finger universe, where she's in a relationship with her auditor, Deirdre. While this world is comical due to, well, hot dog fingers, Deirdre is hurt by Evelyn's rejections. Queerness in being something performed rather than something that we are is a result of the choices that Evelyn has made in her life. This universe is a peek into the potential multitudes of Evelyn's own identity. While Joy is suggested to be queer in most universes,
You're still hung up on the fact that I like girls in this world.
the film suggests that some people are inclined to make some choices regardless, but presents queerness as something outside of the usual born this way rhetoric, a result of choice. Another trope that the film flips is Evelyn's acceptance of Joy. Rather than tritely announcing her change of heart, Evelyn must accept Joy's queerness if she's to first accept herself. Her conversation while Jobu throws herself into the bagel is a declaration of acceptance and solidarity as Evelyn resolves conflicts in other universes. Rather than a transactional acceptance, it achieves the unification of a queer daughter and her immigrant mother, resulting in the bridging of queer experiences across a range of identities and communities. Their bond is strengthened by Evelyn's newfound capacity to relate to her daughter, what Jobu was searching for all along. Their relationship is not the textbook queer mother-daughter relationship, but an instance of understanding, which gives it such a powerful emotional impact. Everything Everywhere All at Once is a generative work for greater possibilities for understanding and evoking the relationalities, often unfair, hegemonic, sexist, heteronormative, but also potentially affirming and healing that make Asian American cinema itself a genre worth knowing. That is to say, the film captures the messiness of navigating real relationships, rather than an idealized, stripped-bare, transactional acceptance that is all too often shown in queer narratives. I Saw the TV Glow also looks at how choice relates to queer identity. While Everything Everywhere follows the typical 15-beat story structure, I Saw the TV Glow departs from this usual formula. Our protagonist, Owen, flees from each call to action, rejecting the narrative's demands to step outside of heteronormative structures until the very end. Maddie is shown to be everything that Owen is not, coming to terms with her queerness and burying herself alive, but Owen's egg has not yet cracked, aka the moment when somebody realizes that they're trans. Not so much telling others yet. For most of the film, Owen is in a liminal space between realization and acceptance, but it isn't until that they cut into themselves that everything comes to light. As much as it is body horror, the cutting scene acts as a freeing moment, the confirmation that there is truly something wrong with not just their body, but their existence. Owen's decision to leave the closet, in this case, the Midnight Realm, is another one altogether. The narrative effectively frames queerness as choice rather than something innate. This aligns with queer theory that queerness is something that you do rather than something that you are. Also, viewing Owen and Maddie's experiences through an intersectional lens shows how it's more difficult for, say, a Black queer youth to come to terms with queerness due to pressure to adhere to normative structures created by racism. Owen must choose which reality to live in, but cannot separate their queer, trans, and Black identities. Using the multiverse shows how these experiences overlap one another, and being queer is existing somewhere between these spaces. Ultimately, I Saw the TV Glow ends on a queer crossroads. You want to believe that Owen makes it out of the closet, rather than asphyxiating inside it. The film becomes a jumping off point for imagining a queer future. The message, there is still time, getting closer and closer till the end. This message goes unheard to Owen, underscoring their inaction, but acts as a caution to viewers. The horror of I Saw the TV Glow acts as both a cautionary tale and a source of hope. And that, my friends, is what makes powerful queer cinema. So, why bother looking at both surrealist filmmaking and queer cinema? In using the lenses of queerness and surrealism to analyze media, you can piece together how deconstructing perceptions of one's reality allows space to engage with marginalized identities and queerness. While queerness addresses hegemonic social values, the Surrealist project aims to unsettle regular conventions of filmmaking. I think challenging and deconstructing dominant social structures, such as the heteropatriarchal normative, meshes well with the ethos of surrealist filmmaking. From finding one's place in the Asian American diaspora and family to the embodied experience of Black transgender youth, surrealism reveals the many ways that queerness itself allows for the multiplicity of the self. By underscoring queerness as choice, these narratives create space for viewers to meaningfully engage with queerness as action, rather than an inscribed trait or label. Although LGBTQ rights have made strides in the past several decades, being both queer and belonging to a marginalized identity in many ways is still like existing between realities, these days more than ever. The representations of Evelyn, Jobu, Owen, and Tara all suggest new ways of looking at queer futurity, self-acceptance, and interpersonal relationships in queer cinema, but also in a modern world. While the surrealist spin on the multiverse is one rhetorical tool that allows for queer literary readings, surrealist filmmaking itself holds potential of posing new ways of unsettling audiences' realities. Queer representation that doesn't conform to genre conventions is a necessity moving forward. Queer futurity requires an intersectional approach to representation that allows for strange, complicated queer stories that defy what has been done before. There are infinite ways to be queer, and thus infinite ways to tell queer stories. These films queer reality itself. Looking forward, I want to see surrealist filmmaking give us a new body of films that break genre conventions and filmmaking rules. I want a future of queer cinema. I want a new future for queer representation, and these two films are just the beginning. Thank you so much for watching!